Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, or you can check us out anywhere you get your podcast from. It finally happened on, two different accounts. First and foremost, the Vancouver Canucks finally traded away JT Miller, and that is actually important to the Penguins side of things because, as we had talked about for months, this has been drama that's been brewing in Vancouver time over time. We heard earlier this week from former Pittsburgh Penguins general manager and current president of hockey ops in Vancouver that there was going to be no resolution to this other than JT Miller being traded away. Now, why is that important? It was the key to unlocking the trade market, and this is a prime example as to why it was. Just a few hours after JT Miller gets sent to the New York Rangers, Marcus Pettersson gets sent back to the Vancouver Canucks. And by back, I just meant in the same day. But the full trade details are as follows. To the Canucks, left shot defenseman Marcus Pettersson, as well as forward Drew O'Connor, somebody that we'll get into in a little bit, but was rumored to be on the trade block this season as well. Coming back the Penguins' direction, former Penn Danton Heinen for a reunion and his second stint with the organization. Right shot defenseman Vincent Desharnais, who we'll talk about here coming up. A conditional first-round pick that actually belongs to the New York Rangers. They traded it back to Vancouver in the JT Miller trade, and we all know Jim Rutherford doesn't like first-round picks, so he said, I don't want that on my books. Send that to the Penguins in order to get Pettersson, as well as a Swedish forward, Melvin Fernstrom, 18-year-old, that was a 2024 third-round pick of the Vancouver Canucks. So those are the full trade details. Penguins getting 4 assets back in exchange for Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor. My initial thoughts on this are it's really hard to not like this from Kyle Dubas. I understand that Marcus Pettersson was the Penguins' best defensive defenseman, but if you had been paying attention at all, you knew the writing was on the wall that Pettersson, whether it be today or whether it be in 3 weeks, he was as good as gone before the NHL's trade deadline. Josh Yohe and Rob Rossi of The Athletic have been reporting for months that there has been no contract negotiations between Pettersson's side and the Penguins side, so you knew he was as good as gone. And most of us thought that, okay, a Marcus Pettersson trade would probably constitute a second-round pick at best, with a prospect that's probably B+ at best. Well, instead, he gets a first-round pick. He gets himself a very young prospect who's already playing in the Swedish professional leagues at 18 years old, and he gets 2 more pieces that we'll get to in just a minute. So again, on the surface, very hard to dislike this when it comes to Kyle Dubas' side of things. Now, of course, you look at Drew O'Connor and his inclusion in this, and you say, well, that was their other trade piece. So you kind of got rid of both of your trade pieces in one swing to be able to get a first-round pick. And I understand it's a conditional first-round pick, but to be able to get a first-round pick and also 2 pieces that, as we'll talk about, could become trade pieces of their own here. Maybe not this season, but probably next season, and can give you some really good play here in the meantime. 2 guys that I think fill holes that this current Penguins roster was in desperate need of. So the fact that you get rid of 2 guys on expiring contracts, turn it into 2 players that you can use not just the remainder of this year and next, but also 2 pieces that could be part of the future of this franchise. Let's look at the pieces that are coming back Pittsburgh's way. Let's start with Danton Heinen. Heinen, as I mentioned already, heading into his second stint with the Pittsburgh Penguins. The first stint was between the 2021-22 season and the 2022-23 season. The Penguins were unwilling to pay his qualifying offer, so they let him walk after 22-23. He had 55 points in 141 games during that stretch for the Penguins, and the biggest thing for him was he tied third on the team at even strength goals in the 2021-22 season with 15. He was Jake Gensel, it was Sidney Crosby, and then there was about 3 or 4 players that were tied with 15 even strength goals. Danton Heinen was one of them, and it wasn't a one-off because he had a rough season in 22-23, which is why the Penguins were uncomfortable bringing him back for that qualifying offer number. He just went to Boston and replicated that. 15 even strength goals last year with the Boston Bruins. Hasn't been able to do the same thing with the Vancouver Canucks, but we'll see if coming back to Pittsburgh reinvigorates that scoring spirit out of Danton Heinen. As far as what he adds to the lineup, I think it's just a more consistent scoring threat than Drew O'Connor was. The one thing that you lose with Drew O'Connor is that dominant forechecking ability, that physicality that you're not going to get out of Danton Heinen, and really that penalty killing ability, I should say. Danton Heinen can play penalty kill a bit. He's played more so in Boston. He played more so in Vancouver than he did in his 2 years in Pittsburgh. I think in Pittsburgh, he finished with maybe 5 or 6 total penalty kill minutes. It's just not an area that Mike Sullivan wanted to put him in. So we'll see what Mike Sullivan does. That's my biggest question here, is who eats all of that PK ice time that Drew O'Connor was taking up. I know you have Cody Glass. I know you have Brian Rust. I know you have Nola Chari still on the team, and you have Matt Nieto that can bump into the lineup if you need more PK guys. But you add Danton Heinen expectedly directly into the same spot that Drew O'Connor was in. You get more offense. You take away a little bit of defense when it comes to special teams, but you also get a guy that can play on the second penalty or the power play unit, excuse me. He's a guy that could add to that unit, a unit that's been pretty good for the Penguins since they split things up into a 1A, 1B, and not a kind of bona fide 1 versus 2 on the power play side of things. So I like the fact that you bring in Heinen. I like he has another year left on his deal, so it's an answer for next year as well as for this year, and it's a guy that you get under contract to help you in the bottom 6, to help aid in your scoring, because the Penguins, as we've talked about, were one of the worst scoring teams in the entire month of January. So some more offense coming from Danton Heinen. Vinny Desharnais, that's an interesting addition, because this is one where I say there's always a faction of the Penguins fan base that says we just needed to get bigger. We needed to get stronger. And while Danton Heinen doesn't add bigger, stronger, he adds the scoring side of things. Vincent Desharnais is going to add exactly what that portion of the fan base wants. The guy is 6'7", 228 pounds. And here's the best part about it. He knows it. He knows he's a big guy, and he knows how to utilize it. We all talked about Ryan Graves how many times and said he's a big guy, he's a horse, but he just doesn't use his physicality enough. That's never going to be a conversation with Vincent Desharnais. He plays on the right side, which helps as well, because the Penguins have been stuck with just 2 right-shot defensemen basically all season long since Jack St. Ivany got sent back down to the AHL earlier in the year. They've been having to play players, whether it be Ryan Shea, whether it be P.O. Joseph on their off wing. Instead, they now get Vinny Desharnais, who's going to be able to sit there on the right side on the third pairing and not only bring a physical presence, but also be somebody who can clear out the net front. And I know those words are going to be music to a lot of our listeners' ears, because I've seen a lot of comments over the last year and a half saying we need somebody, anybody, to help the goaltenders out and clearing out the crease. Vinny Desharnais was brought in to do just that. This is a guy that went on the Stanley Cup run with the Edmonton Oilers last year. He played in, I believe it was 15 of the 23 games. Shout out to Seth Rorabaugh of the Trib for throwing that one out there. But I think when you look at this edition, this is a clear, hey, we wanted to get a little bit tougher on the back end. We needed to get somebody so these opposing forwards aren't all over Alex Nedeljkovic, aren't all over the youngster and Joel Blomqvist. So they went out and they got Desharnais, 6'7", 228. And like I mentioned, he knows it. And that's the best part about this. So looking at those 2 players specifically, the 2 guys that you're going to see this year and next, the 2 guys that are going to make an immediate impact, I don't know as of now. I would have to imagine they're en route to Pittsburgh to potentially play in tonight's game, but I wouldn't guarantee it as of where I'm sitting at 9:28 a.m. recording this podcast. But you look at those 2 pieces, not only do I like it because you're bringing in pieces that add something that's been missing for the current lineup, but you add 2 pieces that have a year left on their deal. You get to see what they have this year, and then next year, they're on the same trajectory as a Drew O'Connor. They're on the same trajectory as a Marcus Pettersson. I don't think either of them are going to net you nearly as much as one of O'Connor or Pettersson did. But with the place that the Penguins are currently at, with the situation they're currently in, it's nice to have pieces that can help now and can turn into trade pieces next season if they end up being supplanted by, in Desharnais' case, Jack St. Ivany, who might be ready to go. In Heinen's case, it might be a Ville Koivunen. It might be a Vasily Ponomarev. It might be a Rutger McGroarty. This is all about potentially just having a placeholder for some of those guys to potentially come up and take their spot. Let's get to the 2 other pieces. The conditional first-round pick. How do you not like a first-round pick? You don't. You always love it. The condition, though, however, for those who don't know, considering Vancouver acquired this pick from the Rangers a few hours before they traded it to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Again, you got to love Jim Rutherford. This pick is top 13 protected this year, which means if the Rangers finish in the top 13 of the NHL draft order this year, they will have the decision to whether or not they want to keep this year's pick or if they want to give it to the Penguins. More than likely, if the Rangers finish in the top 13, they're going to keep the pick, and that pushes the Penguins selection to 2026, in which it cannot move again. So the one condition is if they finish in the top 13, they have the decision whether or not to keep it. It's the same thing the Penguins did with the Erik Karlsson trade, and they ended up getting higher in the draft and not quite getting to that save part. It was a top 10 protected pick. The Penguins pick ended up falling outside the top 10, so they had to let that pick go to the San Jose Sharks. Same thing applies here for the New York Rangers, and I love the fact that the Penguins were able to get a first-round pick in order to trade away Marcus Pettersson. That's just something I didn't expect to happen. So kudos to Dubas on that front. And then Melvin Fernstrom, somebody who I'm excited to jump more into, dive deeper into in the coming weeks, but he's a 2024 third-round pick, 18-year-old right wing that's right now playing in Sweden's top professional league. You got to love it when you get a young kid who had a high draft pedigree that's already playing against men overseas. 3 goals, 5 assists, and 35 games played this season at the top level. He has played 12 games in their under 20 team this year, where he has 11 goals, 7 assists. So he has already outplayed his age range at 18 years old. Now he gets to acclimate himself to professionals over in Sweden at the age of 18. You got to love that. And like I mentioned, I'll dive deeper into Melvin Fernstrom, what he does best, what he does worst, and what he needs to work on in the coming weeks. But I like the fact that they were able to go out there and get a young guy who's already playing against men over in Europe. That's the same thing that we saw with Ville Koivunen, not at the same level because Koivunen was lighting things up last year in the Finnish league, but it's similar in that you get a young guy who's already ready to play professional hockey. That's always going to be beneficial going into the future. So they add another notch into the prospect pool belt in Melvin Fernstrom. They add a conditional first-round pick in which maybe next year or this year, they'll have 2 first-round picks, which it's been a long, long time since that has been the case. And they add 2 players for this year's roster. My final thoughts, like I mentioned at the outset of this, I have a hard time disliking any part of this trade. Of course, it stings to lose Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor, 2 guys that meant a lot to the Pittsburgh Penguins, not just on the ice, but off the ice as well. They both seemed like really good locker room guys, especially Marcus Pettersson. And then, of course, on the ice, both of them very good players. Drew O'Connor's a guy that had to kind of earn everything he got in this league. Undrafted guy out of college, was able to kind of earn the trust of Mike Sullivan, work his way up playing in all 3 phases, specifically, though, in the penalty kill and at 5-on-5. He was a great forechecker. He used his physicality more this season than he has in years past. It was great to see him start to do that. And last year, he put the pieces together when it came to scoring goals. This year, it's been spotty. It's been on and off, and I think that's part of the reason the Penguins were more willing to part with him. Marcus Pettersson, this is a guy that was projected to be traded so many times over his first few years in Pittsburgh, and then he just worked his way into everybody's hearts and minds and saying, wait, this guy's untouchable for the longest time. The last couple of years, he has been the Penguins' top defensive defenseman ever since the departure of Brian Dumoulin. He's worked that role well. He's helped kind of balance Chris Letang and then at times Erik Karlsson as well. And he's been very good for the Penguins. And it stings to lose a guy like that. But whenever you look at the facts that he wasn't going to be re-signed in the offseason, you needed to get something for him. I think the Penguins did a good job in moving him to a place that has wanted him for a long time. So a place that is going to utilize him well, and getting back in return what they did, I think was very, very good. It adds futures and to the now. And I think this is exactly what Kyle Dubas has been doing since the Jake Gensel trade kind of set them off on this trajectory last March. If I'm going to give a grade, I'm going to give an A+. Let me know in the comment section what you would grade this trade. Again, the final details: the Penguins send Marcus Pettersson and Drew O'Connor to the Vancouver Canucks. In return, they get Danton Heinen, Vincent Desharnais, a conditional first-round pick from the New York Rangers, and Swedish prospect Melvin Fernstrom. But that's going to do it for this breaking news edition of the Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.